Absolutely false. That's what Pope Emeritus Benedict called Traditionis Custodes, years before Traditionis Custodes was promulgated, which vindicates the trads. Brethren in Christ, Laudetur Jesus Christus in Secula. This is Timothy Flanders of the Benedict Catholic. Jesus is King. Happy Ember Friday in the octave of Pentecost. Welcome to Pope Benedict Vindicates the Trads. This is a conversation among trads, for trads, about Pope Benedict, Joseph Ratzinger, and his life and work, and how his life and work vindicates the traditional movement as it is understood in our time. So, today's topic, we're going to be getting into the liturgy. This is where Pope Benedict really shines for the trads. This is where his work really vindicates their decades-long struggle of being vilified, calumniated, told they were schismatic and disobedient. This is where Pope Benedict really comes in and goes to bat for the trads. And this is where I think we really need to focus as trads, because we're in an era of Traditionis Custodes, where Mass of the Ages has come out. We'll talk about that as well. So we'll be talking today about the liturgy, and I don't know how long this will take, but what is this, number 11, I think. I think this is part 11 of this series. And I thought of this series, we should just be focusing on the liturgy in this whole series. And so we've already spent 11 parts on this before we even got to the subject. So I don't know how long this part will take, but we're currently on part 11 of this whole series. So we'll just continue every Friday, God willing. So before we go on, I want to encourage everyone to become a member of the Guild. This whole channel is a collaborative effort between myself and other members of the apostolate. Both those you see their face, but also many others who are members, you don't see their face because they're working behind the scenes in many different ways. And so this whole collaborative effort of the apostolate is made possible through the Guild. The Guild supports each other, and they become members of an online guild, which helps to support all of the business arrangements of the apostolate so that we can do our job to create this content for you, and we can make it free for you and free for anybody without ads on YouTube. I hate ads. I hate advertisements. I hate mind control. We don't have any ads on YouTube. So please support the Guild, patreon.com/MeaningofCatholic. If you become a member of the Guild, you get free books. You get a Guild community, the online community. You also get Guild-only content. We just had our first badge of honor, which is where we had our first Guild video removed by YouTube. It was pretty funny because it was an unlisted video, so nobody can see it except for Guild members. It was an unlisted video, and it was removed by YouTube within 24 hours. Or no, it was like 48 hours, I think. Give them like 48 hours. So that means that YouTube is able to analyze the transcript of what is said so rapidly that they took it down very quickly. I was surprised. I didn't even think. It was kind of a test to see how smart these Marxist bots are, but they are quite smart. They've got the buzzwords down. So because we said all these buzzwords in this video with a particular personage who we've talked about before, who's been banned from everything basically. So anyhow, to get a part of the Guild content, you have to be a part of the Guild. As always, if you can't afford it, the point of the Guild is to support people economically. So if you can't afford it, just contact me. We'll still get you a part of the Guild if you can't afford it. So meaningofcatholic.com/contact. I've already got a number of different comments here. Let's see. Second episode. Yeah. Well, yeah. Welcome everybody. Thanks for tuning in. So we're just gonna break down a few of the main texts. We're gonna quote a few of those today, and then next week we'll continue. We'll just continue all these different aspects, and we'll be talking about Mass of the Ages episode 2, because at Mass of the Ages episode 2 really lays out the basic texts, or the basic case of the traditional movement, of why us and our forefathers have striven so mightily to preserve the old rite, the ancient Roman rite, and at a time of the new rite, the new Roman rite. So today I'm going to share two quotes from Pope Benedict, Joseph Ratzinger, and it's going to begin to unpack where Ratzinger's coming from here, which will help to vindicate the trads and get into our topic and everything. Jacob says, who is Pope Benedict? Benedict. Is that what I spelled it? Did I spell it wrong on the title? I'm not really sure. I'm talking about Joseph Ratzinger. So first comment is coming from Joseph Ratzinger's 50 years after he was ordained, he wrote a book called Milestones. And I understand this work as a tribute, an act of gratitude to God for his ordination. So it's just some memoirs recalling all of his life. And people who know Joseph Ratzinger personally, people like Cardinal Seurat, testify to the fact that Ratzinger is a very prayerful man, but in testament to his virtue, he is extremely modest about his spiritual life. And so he does not talk about his spiritual life. I'm not sure if there is really any sort of autobiographical type spiritual, like St. Augustine's Confessions type of thing like that. So this is, when you read this, we might get a false impression from Ratzinger to think that he's just sort of boasting about his life. But if we read him sympathetically, which I think it's fair, if trads want, I always say that if trads want Archbishop Lefebvre to be exonerated, or if they want, their heroes to be exonerated, they have to extend the same courtesy to people like Joseph Ratzinger or people like Karol Wojtyła, who, in my opinion, are very little understood, especially Wojtyła. But Ratzinger, so this is published in Italian in 1997. I think the original language is German, but what I'm saying is that his spiritual life is so private and he's modest about it. He doesn't share about his spiritual life. But we know from those who know him personally that he is a very prayerful man. And so when he talks about his life, he's just talking about these different aspects of his life, and he's not trying to delve deeply into his spiritual life. So let's get into the what is said here. Now, if we go to take this text and we go to page 146, which is where he talks about his period at Regensburg. So this is a very important point here, which this goes up until the year 1977. So Regensburg was when Ratzinger was appointed 1967. So this is right after Vatican II. Joseph Ratzinger is professor of theology at Regensburg. And so this is 1967 and 1977. And here's what he says about the Novus Ordo Missae and the whole liturgical revolution that was happening. This is page 146. At the beginning of my years in Regensburg, there was the publication of the Missal of Paul VI, the Novus Ordo, which was accompanied by the almost total prohibition, after a transitional phase of only a year and a half, of using the Missal we had until then. I welcomed the fact that now we had a binding liturgical text after a period of experimentation that had often deformed the liturgy. So he's lamenting the fact that what was happening, we'll talk about this in the future, what was happening from 1964 to 1969 was a massive iconoclastic chaos that Paul VI himself lamented this chaos. It was a terrible, terrible thing. Destruction of the liturgy. We had priests literally ripping rosaries out of little old ladies' hands at the mass. And priests were saying this publicly, saying we have to go rip the rosaries out of these people's hands. It's quite insane the way the faithful were treated during this period. So he's welcoming the fact that, okay, now we've got a standardized liturgical text that be after this deforming of the liturgy. But here's what Ratzinger said. But I was dismayed by the prohibition of the old missal, since nothing of the sort had ever happened in the entire history of the liturgy. So, first of all, here's your first contradiction. Nothing like that had ever happened in the entire history of the liturgy. Pope Francis in Traditionis Custodes in the accompanying letter, he paints this as if he's just imitating Pius V. Pius V, who forbade liturgies that were new, brand new liturgies in the history of the church. Pius V, when he promulgated Missale Romanum in 1570, he prohibited the brand new liturgies. Well, what's brand new? 200 years old. That's brand new in the history of the church. And he preserved all of the ancient liturgies. Well, that's the exact opposite of what Pope Francis has done. He's prohibited the most ancient Roman rite, and he has imposed the brand new, not even 200 years old. It's even, and even if we consider the changes under John Paul II and the revocations of some of Paul VI's decrees, it's like brand new. It's like brand spanking new. It's like a hot off the presses. He imposed it again and prohibited the ancient Roman Missal. Now, listen to what he says here, though. This is skipping over the next page. The prohibition of the Missal that was now decreed, says Ratzinger, a Missal that had known continuous growth over the centuries, starting with the sacramentaries of the ancient church, introduced a breach into the history of the liturgy whose consequences could only be tragic. Now, I want to notice here, it introduced a breach into the history of the liturgy. Now, I'm not sure what the German original said, but in English, the term breach and the term rupture are synonyms. So when you're introducing a breach, and he's constantly talking about he has another adjective in that same sentence. The other adjective is continuous. So we have grammatically, we have setting up of two different distinctions here, or antonyms here. One is the continuity or continuous with the breach. And so he's already talking in 1997 about continuity on the one hand and rupture on the other. And he sees that the whole development of the old rite, the Roman rite, is a continuous. There's a continuity there. And we'll see when we look at Cardinal Sarah's comments. And Cardinal Sarah is really the greatest exponent of Ratzinger's thought. He was even made the official exponent of Ratzinger's thought by Pope Benedict. So if we want to understand Pope Benedict and his liturgical thought, we have to go to Cardinal Sarah. So we'll get to that later. But Sarah says this exact same thing. The whole continuity of the liturgical tradition is so critical for its authenticity, for its authority, for its life in the place of the life in the church. And so this is what helps us understand what Pope Benedict says in Last Testament. So here's the next text we'll read from. This is Benedict XVI, Last Testament, in his own words. So this is published after he abdicated. This is in German is in 2016. So 3 years after his resignation. Here is where he explicitly contradicts the reasoning of Traditionis Custodes. Now, recall that Pope Francis says in Traditionis Custodes that he says that the whole reason for Summorum Pontificum. So remember, Summorum Pontificum 2007. That's when Pope Benedict reverses this whole breach, and we'll get into that more. But Pope Benedict says, and he interprets. So this is really his own Pope Benedict's own words interpreting Summorum Pontificum. Now, what Traditionis Custodes said is that the whole reason we did that was just because of the SSPX. It had nothing to do with there's a problem with the liturgy or anything like that. It was all about the SSPX. These are just some rigid trads, and they're just fuddy-duddies, and they just can't get along with the program, and they're mean. So we're just going to give them our Latin Mass and try to help them play nice with the other Catholics. That's what Traditionis Custodes says, okay? When you read through it, it interprets that Summorum Pontificum was all about the SSPX. So listen to what Pope Benedict says in 2016. So here we have 5 years before Traditionis Custodes. Now listen to what Pope Benedict says and see how this directly contradicts the reasoning based on what we first read and what he actually thought about it from the very beginning, from back in 1969. Here's what Seewald says this. Now, the reauthorization of the Tridentine Mass, Summorum Pontificum, this endeavor was somewhat timid. Was that because of the resistors within the church itself? And here's what Pope Benedict says. I have always said, and even still today, that it was important that something which was previously most sacred thing in the church to a people should not suddenly be completely forbidden. Now, I think in Mass of the Ages, it quotes Feast of Faith, where it says that the prohibition of the old missal, something like it called in the whole being of the church into question. So he elaborates on this exact same point. He says this, a society that considers now to be forbidden what it once perceived as the central core, that cannot be. The inner identity it has with the other must remain visible. So for me, it was not about tactical matters, and God knows what, but about the inward reconciliation of the church with itself. So it's not about anything except for the inward reconciliation of the church with itself. It makes complete sense if you're we published an article at 1 Peter 5. It was the sociological analysis of the liturgical reform. And it pointed out how, like, if you're a sociologist or you're a historian or you're a basic academic with a rational brain, you can see Ratzinger's reasoning here. How can any religious group whatsoever abolish the most central thing and replace it with something else and not call into question its entire existence? It's very simple. It's a very simple reason. Now, but check this out. Seewald gets more to the point of Traditionis Custodes. Here's what Seewald says. The reauthorization of the Tridentine Mass is often interpreted primarily as a concession to the Society of Pius X. That's exactly what Pope Francis would do 5 years later. So what does Pope Benedict say when Seewald inadvertently brings up 5 years before it happened exactly what Pope Francis would say in Traditionis Custodes? What does Pope Benedict say? That is just absolutely false! Exclamation mark. That's Pope Benedict's opinion of Pope Francis's reasoning in Traditionis Custodes. That is just absolutely false! Exclamation mark. It was important for me that the church is one with herself inwardly, with her own past, that what was previously holy to her is not somehow wrong now. The right must develop. In that sense, reform is appropriate. But the continuity must not be ruptured. This goes right back to what we read in the memoirs. 1969, there's a breach in liturgical history. There has to be a continuity. We're calling our own being into question by abolishing the ancient Roman rite. Now, he addresses the SSPX question. The SSPX is based on the fact that people felt the church was renouncing itself. That must not be. Now, notice the implied concession here, the SSPX. So he says that must not be. So he first establishes that to abolish the Latin Mass would be, in fact, to renounce itself. For the church to renounce itself. And so, therefore, the SSPX was based on the fact that people thought that was happening. That must not be. Well, based on what he says in the memoirs, that was, in fact, happening de facto. De facto, Paul VI, according to his own intentions, he intended to abrogate the Mass. In fact, it's really funny. If you read this text, where is that thing? I lost it. Okay. So if you read this text by James Custodes, the Pope, the Council, and the Mass, this was published shortly before Summorum Pontificum. And these are good Catholic scholars. These are James Custodes, great guy. I don't know Kenneth Whitehead very well, but these are Orthodox pious Catholics. And they argue that Paul VI was abrogating the Latin Mass. So everybody thought that Paul VI was abrogating the Latin Mass. except for the SSPX, who said, no, that cannot be. Well, that's exactly what Pope Benedict says. That cannot be. We can't do this. Even if you try, you can't do it. Now he addresses the fact that, yes, the SSPX were involved. Continuing Pope Benedict. As I said, my intentions were not of a tactical nature. They were about the substance of the matter itself. Of course, it is also the case that the moment one sees a church schism looming, the Pope is obliged to do whatever is possible to prevent it happening. This also includes the attempt to lead these people back into unity with the church if possible. End quote. So we can see what Ratzinger is saying here as Pope Emeritus Benedict. He's saying, my intentions were not of a tactical nature. They're not about the SSPX. It's about the very substance of the church's very own essence. Now, of course, it deals with the SSPX too, so that's a secondary issue. So yes, Summorum Pontificum was about SSPX, but that is a secondary tangential issue. What he says here clearly shows that even if the SSPX did not exist, Pope Benedict would have done what he did in Summorum Pontificum. Why? Because in 1969, when he had these thoughts, the SSPX didn't even exist yet. So the SSPX did not even exist at the time that he thought that there was a liturgical rupture. All of these things vindicate the Trad's opposition to Traditionis Custodes, because the reasoning of Traditionis Custodes, as we said, is the fallacious claim that Summorum Pontificum is all about the SSPX. It is a fallacious claim. It's historically false. It is simply historically false. And so if the Pope makes a decree based on a falsehood that he's been misinformed by Andrea Grillo and various other Italian neo-modernist heretics and whatnot who hate the Latin Mass, if he's been misled and misinformed or whatever, then we have the duty to say, Holy Father, you've been misinformed. And so this is the Trad movement now. We're trying to inform the Holy Father and others who support this whole measure. You have been misinformed about Pope Benedict. And so that's the purpose of this show. But this helps to vindicate the Trads, because Pope Benedict, as we said in the very beginning, he is an adverse witness for the Trads. He's not a Trad per se. He doesn't hate the Trads, but he's one of the most mainstream conciliar and post-conciliar voices. So that's the reason for that. Let me see a few comments. Prohibition of TLM automatically incur the wrath of St. Peter and St. Paul. Now, Peter, I'm not sure if you're referring to quo primum here, but if you are, this is an argument that we need to nuance this a little bit, because the wrath of St. Peter and Paul and other such in sort of strong language is used by the popes to warn against impious dissent against their decrees. And so that does not preclude a pope in the future from reversing certain decrees, even if they are. So, for example, Clement XIV's decree suppressing the classical Jesuits said that this will be a law forever. But 2 popes later, Pius VII reversed that. He says similar. Pius V says similar things in his document promulgating the Roman Breviary. He says, if anyone shall change this law, he will incur the wrath, etc., etc. But Pius X completely abrogated that and imposed in a brand new breviary. And this is something that Trads often point to as an inorganic rupture in the breviary by Pius X. So those are some aspects to that. I don't know if you're referring to that or not. Andrea says, I'm afraid Ratzinger defends the TLM for aesthetic reasons, and he misses the point in the overall destruction of all Catholic theology, pastoral customs, and sacraments after 1969. The implementation of Bonini's Novus Ordo was only an instrument of a much larger plan of destruction. That is not my reading of Ratzinger. I do not think that his critique of the suppression or the critique of the Novus Ordo was on aesthetic grounds. I think it is actually much deeper. I think it is really in accordance with the traditional position that there is a problem with the reform itself. That's why he promoted the reform of the reform and the new liturgical movement, which is about the Novus Ordo. It's about the fact that there is a issue with the Novus Ordo, apart from the fact that Latin Mass is suppressed. So we'll get into that more in future shows on this. Ratzinger loved the Latin Mass for anti-materialist reasons, not aesthetics. Yeah, I would tend to agree with that view. Do you know about the prophecies of Saint Pope Malachi? Not much. I Catholic prophecies are something that I'm not very well versed in, unfortunately. But I can't really comment much. But I basically know about the Fatima prophecies, but I don't know much about all the various prophecies that are out there. So I'm sorry I can't comment on that. But that's all we have on the show today. So thanks so much for watching. Let's offer up an Ave. I want to pray especially for Pope Francis. There was just an announcement that he had to cancel a trip, and so we know that his health is frail. There are quasi serious rumors that he does have serious cancer. This may or may not be the case, but it is from more qualified sources. I've heard that. So let's pray an Ave for Pope Francis. We pray for our Holy Father that he may, if he is seriously ill and towards death, that he may have a good death, strengthened by the sacraments of the church. And if not, we pray that he may recover and that he may be delivered from his enemies, as the traditional prayer goes. In nomine Patris et Filii Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum, benedicta tu mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus. Santa Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Amen. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Jesus is King.